You found us again. No stoplights. Want to thank our sponsors, Francis Marion University, Carolina Bank, Micky Finn's, Victor's, MPD Electric Co-op, McCall Farms, Pepsi of Florence, PLC Commercial Real Estate, and McLeod Health. We are in the throes of political season. I get so animated with my hands. We're very much intensely involved in our political season. I need therapy. I need a degree of I need a respite from the body politic. It's a controversial political season. I've never taken this broadcast and tried to indoctrinate or convince someone that my way of seeing the world is better than another way. One of my relief valves in life historically has been sports. And college football is living proof that there's a God in heaven, because man, mortal man, could not have created something as perfect as college football. And we did a podcast last week about the officiating and the South Carolina LSU game. And I did that to basically keep my sidekick, Dave Baker, from jumping off the top of a building because he felt the Gamecocks had gotten jobbed. I think the Gamecocks caught some bad breaks. I don't know if they got jobbed or not. And we use kind of analogy of here's a conspiracy theory or here's incompetence. The Victor's Cup is incompetence. The Francis Marion Cup is a conspiracy theory. And were the mistakes made by the officials incompetence, or was there some grand conspiracy to protect one of the name brands at the expense of one of the also-rans? I want to stay in the realm of college football today because I am burnt out on politics, and I know the majority of you probably feel as I do. There are a lot of concerns today about the state of college football. There's a lot of worry about where the game's headed. It's been a celebration of amateurism. It's been the pageantry of homecoming and, the good old college try. And along the way, it became very lucrative. And along with the financial nature of sports and entertainment and how that's changed over the years, college football is not exempt from that. It was not. It had an evolution that happened within the game. And we're trying to figure out where our landing spot is. Where is the exit ramp that we get off and find the future and solace and the fans are comfortable, the universities are comfortable, the student athletes, light on the student, heavy on the athletes are comfortable. I want to play off that podcast we did last week because I basically condemned the NCAA. And I think I'm right. I think the NCAA has been grossly negligent, maybe conspiratorial, I don't know. But they've not handled managing the affairs of college football well at all. I think we mentioned last week that the courts ruled that the NCAA, and they're the enforcement arm. The NCAA is the enforcement arm of the member institution. So in essence, the universities were taking advantage of a certain situation that had been allowed to exist for a long, long time. And my theory has always been this. My theory has been as long as people believe they're being treated fairly. Now, my father famously said the fair comes in October. If you're looking for fairness in life, there'll be some days you probably get more than your fair share. There'll be other days you feel like Jesus on the cross and you're being persecuted. But for a long time, the game of college football had balance and proportionality. There was an equilibrium. And by that, I mean the coach made a sum of money to take the job of coaching an amateur athletic team, college football team at a major university or not major university in America. And they were paid a sum of money. The assistant coaches very often had side jobs. They did other things than coach college football. Somewhere along the way, the negotiations led to larger financial reward and a larger financial reward. And eventually we got to a place, as we mentioned last week, where two conferences in America have television rights deals worth $1 billion. A billion's 1,000 million. And this is annual revenue. This is recurring money. This is not, hey, we'll write you a check for $1 billion and we have the rights to broadcast your game for the next 20 years. No, it was a recurring and significant amount of money that came to the coffers of the member institutions. And when the SEC and Big Ten, college football in general, becoming big business, the student athlete you knew sooner or later would look around and say, I'm not getting my fair share of the pie. I use the analogy, and I'm bad about using analogies, but I use the analogy. I'm a big Springsteen fan. And when I go see Bruce in Madison Square Garden, I have no idea how they divide the money up. I don't care how they divide the money up. But I'm expecting Bruce gets a bigger share than anybody because he's the performer. I know the roadie gets paid, the promoter gets paid, the producer gets paid, the person responsible for selling the tickets, the marketing gets paid. But I would imagine when they start writing checks, Bruce gets the biggest check of all because he is the performer. Madison Square Garden would get a percentage of that revenue. Well, I think college football, and I think it's the NCAA's fault, got itself in a place where the performer, the player, the student athlete who's having knee surgeries and he's in the weight room in the offseason and he's watching his diet, and sometimes he goes to class and sometimes he doesn't. And when he doesn't go to class, he's on suspension or he's got, a price to pay to his teammates. But they were the performer. I mean, they were the cash cow. They were the revenue generator. I think I used the analogy last week that if I were to, I was in the truck body manufacturing business, and if I manufactured truck beds and didn't have to pay welders, I probably wouldn't have to do podcasts to keep my head above water. I'd have a hell of a lot more money now than I do. But I had to pay welders because they performed. They were an important ingredient to the functioning of our family business. So years ago, we started considering whether or not it was fair to pay the player or not. And we started stipends. We started some of these different ways. I know we've always had bad guys, and we've always had funneling money through churches, and we've always had assistant coaches getting paid more than they deserve so they can take some of the money. We've always had an under-the-table way, I guess, of taking care of players. And I guess the more prominent winning the program, the better they were at paying under the table. But the Supreme Court ruled that the NCAA was in violation of about every antitrust law that existed under the sun, and they were forced to remodel the construct of college football. Out of that came name, image, and likeness. That was a case settled in California. U.S. Supreme Court eventually decides, the kid has a right to the revenue that his name, image, and likeness generates. He certainly deserves a share of that. And once again, I believe, now it's my opinion, it's subjective, it's certainly open to criticism. I believe that if the coach still made a couple of $100,000, if the assistant coaches made $50,000, $60,000, $75,000 and had a side job selling cars or doing carpenter work in the off season, the value of the scholarship is commensurate. I mean, there would be a proportion there. There would be an equilibrium of what the student athlete's getting, what the coaches are getting, what the university is getting. All of a sudden, the university is getting billions of dollars. The coaches are getting tens of millions of dollars. And the student athlete is asked to take the value of the scholarship and consider that a fair trade. There's no way that's a fair trade. There's no way that football players in the Power 5 conferences don't deserve a bigger slice of the pie. So my argument has always been we're here in this place of chaos and confusion because the NCAA refused to accept responsibility for the changing dynamic. They were greedy. I mean, I about said something I don't want to even say on the podcast. They were greedy son of a guns. They wanted all of the money. The universities wanted most of the money. The coaches were making a lot of money, and the kid was looking around going, what about me? I mean, it'd be like Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band in Madison Square Garden. At the end of the show, Bruce goes and gets an envelope. His check isn't as big as the roadie who set the equipment up. There's no way that Bruce would tolerate that. There's no way that that model and that functioning reality can sustain. It's just it's inconceivable that the NCAA considered the former model to be fair and balanced. So I want to go kind of a brief analysis of where we are and what some of the conversations we need to be having should entail. I think we are now a little bit like politics. We're in a place of confusion. NIL is the Donald Trump of college football. It's a disruptor. It has changed the way we've historically looked at a certain segment of our sports and entertainment fandom. And there are some that believe the student athlete's getting too much. There's some that believe he's turning his back. I saw with the UNLV quarterback, they're undefeated, and he quit on his team. Well, he says he quit on his team because some of the obligations that he was promised have not been met. I'll ask you this. Marlboro MPD Electric Co-op is a sponsor of our broadcast, our podcast. If you don't pay your light bill, they turn your lights off. If you're a football player and you're promised a paycheck after every game or once a month or however they constructed that deal and you don't get what you were promised, you don't play any longer. I mean, to criticize the quarterback without knowing what the details and specificities of his entail, I think is totally unfair to the quarterback. Now, he may be getting exactly what he was told, and he may be a quitter. I don't know if he is or not. But I want to go back to this concept that I'm arguing. Trump has disrupted the political world in a way it never has in my lifetime. I'm nearly 61 years old. I've never seen the body politic as confused and chaotic as it is today. I laugh about it because I think it needs a good kick in the ass. College football is dealing with a lot of confusion and chaos. And the other similarity to this is the folks that ran the body politic, and I'm talking about the load-bearing walls that secure and enable the international and domestic order. I'm talking the BlackRocks, the Vanguards, the big corporate America, Wall Street, those military-industrial complex. Those load-bearing walls have used the heavy hand of their influence to make sure it works a certain way. The NCAA and its member institutions have used their heavy hand to make sure college football worked a certain way. Well, one day a student athlete at Clemson or South Carolina or another Power 5 conference that maybe he's in the Darla School of Business, and maybe he's taking a course in finance and financial evaluations, and he kind of looks at his situation and he says, okay, I'm getting room and board. I'm getting preferential treatment. I get better food at a different time. I get to travel with a team. But my head coach just signed a $100 million contract. The university across my front, the front of my uniform, I read just got a share of $1 billion. Am I getting my fair share? Am I getting, and look, go back to the word fair. Am I getting what I'm entitled to? I am Springsteen. I am the performer. I am the reason the lower bowl and upper decks are full at Death Valley and Williams-Brice. They're not coming to see a coach. They're not coming to see administrators glad hand. They're coming to They're coming to watch me play football. And I'm getting $20,000, $25,000 a year, maybe another 10 or 15 in ancillary bonus. But okay, let's round up and say the value of the scholarship, room and board, is $25,000. Let's say they're getting another $25,000. They're getting $50,000 a year to be the main act. The coaches are getting $10 million a year. The universities are building dorms with climbing walls and Starbucks. And I don't know how in the hell you can believe that's sustainable. Somebody somewhere one day was going to look around and say, what's going on here? I mean, I'm getting a $25,000 scholarship. I'm getting the benefit that equals that in some sort of ancillary or extracurricular sort of way. But the guy who yells at me and recruits me and convinces me to come here gets $10 million a year. The university, once again, that I've got emblazoned across my upper torso is benefiting from their share of $1 billion. And I, once again, forget the antitrust laws, forget courts. Fair. I just think the student athlete said, hell, this isn't fair. And something's got to be done about it. I don't know that student athletes, football players we're talking about today, I don't know that they've studied antitrust. I don't know that they know who a single member of the U.S. Supreme Court is. But once again, they're informed enough to know what they're doing is important enough that 75 or 80 or 85,000 people gather on Saturday and yell their guts out on behalf of the players playing the game. So it's the NCAA's reluctance to give an inch, and they're being forced to give a mile that created this chaos and confusion, this Donald Trump era of college football. What are the answers? That's a very worthy conversation, and a conversation that I don't know where it ends up. I don't know who needs to be in the room. The player went from having no leverage, at the mercy of the system of which they had very little control over, to honestly probably pendulum swings. They probably got too much leverage now. I don't deny that. I mean, I think I don't think the wild, wild west is good for college football. I don't think 2 transfers a year, 6 transfers per career, entering into unofficial agreements. Maybe it's a contract, maybe it's not a contract. Maybe it's binding, maybe it's not binding. Or college players with agents, college players with teams of lawyers. I'm not. That's not healthy. That's not sustainable. But once again, the player has no leverage. The NCAA is in total control, and they abuse that privilege. All of a sudden, the dam breaks. The courts rule that you're violating every antitrust law in America. The pendulum swings a million miles to the other side, and the player tells everybody to kiss his ass because he can. He's got all the leverage now. I'm hoping, once again, that we find some place of equilibrium. And that is a very important conversation about the future of college football. Now, what do I think needs to happen? I think you need to limit the number of transfers a kid is allowed during a 4-year college football career. I think we need salary caps. I don't think you should ask fans to fund collectives. I think the collective is probably a good idea to give the university a layer of insulation so the player doesn't become an employee of the university. I'm not in favor of that. I think you ask for a lot of problems, right to organize, PTO, vacation time. Kid wants to take a PTO the Thursday before the Clemson game. If you're a Gamecock, or the Thursday before the Carolina game, if you're a Clemson fan, I mean, that's not good for the sport. So I'm willing to concede some of the perspectives that I have. I think the collective should be the layer of insulation from the university to the player. But I think that universities have demanded of fans, you want a good parking spot, want a good ticket, you want to be on the good list, you want to go to IPTAY meetings and sit close to the coach, you want to go to Gamecock Club meetings and sit close to the coach, then you better give us more money. I saw in Tennessee, they're asking for a 10% talent fee. I think it's absurd that the universities are requesting of the fans to further fund. They've already built the dorm room with a climbing wall and Starbucks. They've already funded to some degree the reasoning why television networks believe televising college football games are as valuable as they have. And I just think to go back to the fan and say, hey, we appreciate all you've done. We really, we value you like you can't imagine, but nudge, nudge, we need a little more. We need a 10% talent fee so we can do some other things with all this money that we've got coming into the coffers. And I've heard university presidents and I've heard AD say, we'll have to tighten our belt. I mean, if the collective begins, if the university begins funding the collective, that's the money the university doesn't have to do some other wonderful things with it. Well, I'm a big believer in the public sector should be required from time to tighten its belt. I mean, the private sector is always tightening its belt and figuring out ways to save money. Bureaucracies tend to not function that way. And I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. I think they're good and decent people who run, a myriad of these programs, and a multitude of decisions they make are probably on point and in the best interest of the game. But I think we've got to have a limit on transfer portals. I think we've got to have some sort of salary cap. And I don't know how you value a player. I mean, that's the free market. Does he have a stubborn mom and dad? Could. Does he think more of his abilities than he could? I've read some things where take the NFL projected draft status of player A and give him a percentage of what that draft pick pays in the NFL. In other words, if you are projected, if your draft status is somewhere between the 75th player and the 91st player, you go and look and see what the compensation package for that player is, and the college player gets a third of it, a half of it. I don't know what the number is, but that would be a reasonable way to place a value on an unknown commodity like the skill of a wide receiver at South Carolina, or a linebacker at Clemson, or a quarterback at Georgia, or a defensive back at Nebraska. It's just kind of an interesting perspective or dynamic that we find ourselves in. And it seems to me that the NCAA is still reluctant to involve themselves in some of these conversations that I think they'll be forced to be involved in. My personal opinion, once again, limit the number of times a kid can transfer. Find some value in that kid that is based on what truly their talent is worth, and stop asking the fans to fund everything. The university's taking in television rights revenue, ticket revenue, Gamecock Club contributions, IPTE contributions. I don't know what the Chanticleer Club or what the name of the club is down at Coastal Carolina, but they've done a good job in creating and building and sustaining a pretty good football program. But I'd like to see a place where, let's say 20% of all the television revenue that Clemson and South Carolina collect is funneled to the collective, and the collective disperses that money to the athlete, to the football player. We don't like to admit that we're paying kids to play football. We've come up with this, it's pretty interesting. Instead of the pendulum's here, kid has no leverage. Pendulum here, kid has all the leverage. But in some of the bylaws and stipulations that I've read, it's the quarterback at Clemson has to do 30 hours of community service. And the linebacker at South Carolina has to go to a children's hospital and a burn clinic. And, there's value in that. There's great value, and that is called community service. And I'm very supportive of both programs and all programs in America, almost insisting or requiring their high-profile student athletes to do some charitable endeavors. But let's not beat let's not beat around the bush and kind of get ourselves in a similar position later. We're paying kids to play football. And the kid deserves to be paid to play football. The kids generate enormous amounts of revenue. They've never shared proportionally in the benefit of that revenue. The court said you got to. And it seems to me that we still don't have our arms around. I think we've got our arms now, reluctantly, about how we got here. I don't think we have our arms around the conversation that we should be having today to create some clarity moving forward. And then once again, the greatest game known to man, proof that there's a God in heaven, it's college football to me. And I don't like where it is. I certainly don't appreciate the arrogance and the entitlement of the NCAA and the way they mismanage this we're not here if the NCAA does the right thing. But the NCAA decided to not do the right thing. The courts forced them to do the right thing. Pendulum swings from here to here, a little bit like our optic last week. Pendulum goes from no leverage to all the leverage. I'm hoping that we can get back to some semblance of equilibrium. And once again, I think that involves a kid being highly paid. The problem with college football today, I think, and this will be a learning curve, and I don't know how it goes over, but if you're a fan of the Green Bay Packers, let's say if you're a fan of the, trying to think of a player, Gamecock and Tiger. If you're a fan of the Jacksonville Jaguars and you go watch your former favorite quarterback Trevor Lawrence play, you know damn well he's making more money than you are. And you expect him to make more money than you do. Gamecocks, if you go watch Deebo Samuel and the San Francisco 49ers play, you know he's making a lot more money than you are. Odds are. I would imagine there's some fans that make more than Deebo or Trevor Lawrence. The problem we've got ourselves in is the NCAA has convinced us that this is amateurism at its best. And you're in the upper deck at Death Valley or Williams-Brice, you're looking down at a kid, and you know that you more likely than not make more than he does. What about the fan bases when they're sitting in the middle of the upper deck and they went on one vacation but not two because season tickets got so expensive, and they watched the linebacker for Clemson miss a tackle. They watched the wide receiver for South Carolina drop a ball. All of a sudden, okay. I just think that is a growth. That is a learning curve that fan bases are going to have to come to grips with, because once again, when you go to a pro football game, you know the odds are the players on the field are making a lot more money than the fans in the stands. I'm not talking about the luxury boxes. I would imagine that would be different in some of the luxury suites. But amongst the regular and casual fan, can college football address that in some way, shape, or form? Can the fan base at Clemson and the fan base at South Carolina go to games, know where the quarterback's making $1 million a year? Or the wide receivers making $250,000 a year, or the linebackers making $150. I don't know where we end up. I don't have any idea what the value placed on these players will eventually be, but we got to get to a better place. And once again, I blame almost solely the NCAA for letting this game find itself in the predicament it's in. And the last people I'd let in the room. I guess we're obligated today. But as we build the new normal, as we look at the game that I love and then figure out what its future looks like, the last people I want in the room is the NCAA. They're the reason we're in the predicament we're in, and there's no way that I would give them the opportunity to be involved in finding a better path and a better way forward.